Primal Chaos. Hey everybody, Primal Chaos here. Welcome to the channel. Now, first things first, I've got a 3D print running that I was hoping would be done by now, and it's not. So if you hear any, I'll do my best to get rid of the noises and stuff like that in post, but if you hear any little weird whizzes and clicks and stuff like that, just know that it's bothering me just as much as it's bothering you. Okay, so anyway, that all said, here we are. We're checking out a new song by Lindsey Stirling, who is an amazing violinist and very pop culture centric violinist. And of course, Amy Lee from the inimitable Evanescence. Now, those of you who have been with the channel a long time know that I've got a history with Evanescence going right back to their first album, Fallen. At the time when that came out, I was working on a project. And, you know, we were trying to figure out what we wanted to do. And I was always, you know, going back to I started writing songs and stuff in the mid to late 90s. And, you know, the vibe I always had listening to bands like, you know, live with their album Secret Samadhi, like the second album, third album. And, you know, other bands like that, like Guns N' Roses in the you know, 92, 93 sort of era were starting to put a lot of orchestration and some symphonic elements into their stuff. And to me, as someone who sort of grew up in that sort of time frame, that to me was what was special about music at the time. It was like, okay, so you take rock and heavy metal and you sort of add a symphonic sort of cinematic element to it. You know, that was the dream. Of course, nowadays you have all that technology available at your fingertips. You've got plugins of orchestral things and sample libraries and all sorts of things available to you. But back then it was a little bit more out of reach, you know, and you sort of had to cope with whatever synthesizers you had that had some sort of a orchestral element. You could barely even record audio and electronic stuff at the same time on the same system at that point. In fact, I certainly couldn't, not until years later. And so, you know, when I was discussing with my partner about what sort of music we were going to do, female vocalist, heavy rock, I was like, well, I really would love to make it a bit more cinematic and a bit darker. And then we went to a movie and there was a trailer there for the Daredevil film, the Ben Affleck one. And Bring Me to Life was the song, right? And so I remember elbowing her at the movies and saying, hey, this is the kind of stuff we should be doing. And, you know, so from then on, obviously they were a big part. I've fallen off with them a few, you know, in recent years. I listened to stuff here and there. Lindsey Stirling, I remember from going way back, mostly through collaborations that she often does. Like she did a collaboration with Pentatonics and, you know, things, and more so the pop culture-y sort of stuff that she does is interesting to me. Like she's into cosplay and things like that. And so she was always popping up and I'm always taking interest because she's very talented. And I like her sort of, her fantasy spin on sort of classical interpretive modern music, right? If that makes sense. So anyway, these two juggernauts go head to head and we get to experience what that's like. I haven't heard this yet. It's going to be obviously, I'm assuming, being that I know that, you know, Amy's proclivities are very fantasy driven and very sort of electronica, you know, as far as like she likes to introduce a lot of those sort of elements into her metal style music. I don't know why I went metal, you know, it's metal. And, you know, Lindsey's obviously going to be doing a lot of sort of lyrical melodic playing throughout because that's what she does and that's what she's there for, right? So I'm really curious to hear how this all comes together. Will it be sort of like, you know, something a little bit more fantasy, or is it going to be sort of a bit more edgy, new metal-y kind of evolved new metal plus or new metal 2.0 sort of thing that a lot of people are sort of working on currently? Or, you know, something completely different. Maybe it'll be a piano ballad with classical elements. We're about to find out. So anyway, I'm going to jump us straight in. Let's take a look. And this is Love Goes On and On featuring Amy Lee of Evanescence by Lindsey Stirling. Here we go. It's already the soundtrack to Skyrim. It's kind of exactly what I was hoping for. You gotta love those octave shifts with strings, right? That's always so cool. It's a crossbow. Has she always had that? Or is this new? Her interpretive dance thing has always been a thing, I know that. she did the same. She did the octave shift. Oh, come on. That's really nice. Electronica sort of drum grooves. So I don't want to stop it too much, but there's so much to cover. I feel like if I leave it to the end, I'm going to forget. What I love is that they had a singular musical idea that goes through, I guess, like 4 revisions, right? So you've got that melody that, you know, Lindsey plays slow, like lower, and then she does like an octave shift to sort of make it more dramatic. And then Amy comes in and she does like a lower harmony or a lower sort of octave, and then does the same, goes up a bit higher. But the whole time, if you listen carefully, the production is building underneath. Like it starts off with, I'm not sure if it's at the beginning with the strings. Is it just piano? It's hard to tell. I think it's like mid-range piano, or it could be like plucked strings. I'm not sure. Either way, whatever. And as you go along, now you got some sort of more padded sort of elements in there. And then now filtered drums come in with that filtered drum rhythm, which is definitely an Evanescence thing. And in fact, it's a modern pop rock element where oftentimes, in order to make the second verse different from the first, the producer will just put a filter on the drums for the second verse, and you get that kind of element instead of like a you know, and so that's fairly common as well. But I just love how they've just artfully sort of built it up and up and up until it crescendos into that sort of high breakout part where Amy does the higher notes. Another thing I wanted to point out too at this point is Amy just has an exceptionally good voice for layering. It's ideal because I would assume she's probably, I'd say she's probably a mezzo or something in that range. I don't think she doesn't have like a high lyric soprano sort of like narrow or more focused tone. She has a rounded tone. And it's sort of almost a little bit more bell-like in that sort of, you know, up in here sort of thing. And so what you tend to find with voices like that is they're so good for layering harmonies and things like that. And interestingly enough, what I learned, I did a breakdown. If you haven't seen it, go check it out. I did a breakdown with the, I guess you call them stems of Bring Me to Life, where I had individual studio tracks for all of the instruments and stuff broken down. And so you can just solo her vocals. And to be honest, I was expecting to hear a lot of production on her vocals, like a lot of layering and a lot of, you know, effects and tuning and stuff to make it so even and sort of to have that edginess and stuff. And when you listen to the vocal by itself, there's very little done to it. It's actually quite incredible. She has this knack for sounding incredibly processed while she's not. It's just her natural timbre, which is really interesting as well. But what it means though is, you know, she's very dramatic and she likes to build very layered sort of production or like arrangements, I should say. And she has the voice that's brilliant for it. Like if you had like a really high soprano singer, you'd want somebody like Amy to come in and harmonize with her and sort of pad out their vocals because it just blends so beautifully. You know, that's something I think is really underappreciated a lot of times. Let's jump back a little bit. Such an uplifting moment. That's so wonderful. Second of all, where is this location? Where did they film this? Actually, that's a perfect example. See, you've got Lindsey playing like is an octave above what Amy's singing, and that's how you would pair like a lyric soprano voice with someone like with Amy who has a lower range and like a more rounded timbre. You get this beautiful layering where they complement each other, and all you're really hearing is Amy's voice, but now it has this high edginess to it supplied by the violin that normally she wouldn't have, and it just works so beautifully together. You can hear it there. Plus all that reverb.
Familiar silence when I'm lost inside my heart. I can't hear the voice inside me, so I look up to the stars.
That's great. I love how they broke it down to just that solo part. Oh, I like that. That's cool. She has just beautiful articulation in the fingers, man. So good. That was cool. So one of the things I've been sort of working on lately with composition and stuff like that is taking the basic form of a song and then doing another pass and just increasing the resolution of it, where you start with the basics and all the parts and patterns worked out. And then you go through again, okay, where's the little pockets of things that become repetitive or boring? And then you go and you tamper with them, you tinker with them. You go, I'm talking about like high produced pop rock metal sort of stuff. I'm not talking about like, really organic sort of music like your blues or bluegrass, or, I'm talking about highly produced pop dramatic sort of stuff like this, right? And taking those little moments where there's something that just sort of dies off or is not interesting, and then filling that with a flourish that's a beautiful artistic flourish. It's kind of like when you do a painting, you start with like a rough underpainting, and then you do another pass and another pass and another pass until eventually you're putting in the fine specularity and little details that make it look realistic and make it pop. And I really appreciate whoever produced this. Just there's so many little uplifting elements that just sort of come through. And a lot of it is Lindsey doing those little improvisational sort of licks and stuff like that between parts as well. But just like the little drum flourishes and these little uplifting sort of reverse hits and things like that, or moments where everything drops back into like it breaks down to just a solo instrument. All of those things don't need to be there, but if you put them in there, it just keeps you focused and interested in what you're listening to. And as long as it's done competently and it's not overdone, obviously, but I think it was about here somewhere. Yeah, there's like a reverse reverb or a reverse sort of moment just in there. Just I will say this. First of all, that was a great experience. I love that, but just something that's on my head, in my mind before I forget. One thing I love about Lindsey is that most people will learn to play a song, or they'll write a song, they'll learn to play it, and they'll record it, and they'll be very cautious to make sure they're in the right position, and they've got the right this and the right that, and everything's got to be, it's got to be the right temperature in the room and everything like that. And then they'll go and do a music video, and the director will be like, okay, we want a lot of dynamic movement and motion and stuff like that. And so at that point, people have to be like, oh, I've got to move or whatever. You know that for Lindsey, part of her physicality of playing is her movement. You can tell because she doesn't bat an eyelid, making these huge dramatic sweeping motions while playing incredibly complex articulations on her instrument. And you know from seeing her do it live that it's just part and parcel of the whole interpretation of violin playing through her lens as an artist, right? And I find that endlessly fascinating, because physical performance in rock isn't something that's usually a major concern. Like, there was a few sort of bands that came through, hardcore bands and stuff back in the day, where running around and doing backflips and guitar spins and stuff are all a consideration. And to a degree, that's kind of it. But I feel like if you watched Lindsey perform this in the studio, she's not going to be doing full choreography, but I guarantee you she's fully moving and like producing the sound with not just the physicality of her hands and arms, but also the rest of her core and her body as well. I guarantee that's the case, because it just flows through her. I'm sort of the same. I can't play guitar standing still. Part of me keeping in time rhythmically and you know, all that sort of stuff is movement, right? I have to sort of, I'll be stepping around and I'll be definitely moving my body completely while I'm playing, especially rhythmic parts and stuff like that, because it's how I sort of keep everything with the right energy, you know, if that makes sense. In her case, she's got much more delicate parts and more intricate parts to play than I typically do. And, you know, to a degree, if I was playing something like that, you'd see me stop and focus. But I'm talking about more like rhythm guitar parts and things like that. I have to get into it physically. But yeah, she's a fascinating performer. She definitely is. I've got more to say about this. Hang around after the ad break and I'll give you my full summary. Hey guys, today's video is brought to you in part by Skillshare. Now, anyone who knows me will tell you that I have way too many interests and hobbies. I'm also what's known as an autodidact, which means I'm largely self-taught, but my interests vary wildly amongst an entire gamut of disciplines. Disciplines ranging from things like music production, composition, video production, YouTube content creation, 3D printing, 3D modeling, electronics, woodworking, drawing, painting, graphic design, computers and code. The list just goes on and on. And in order to become proficient in all of these disciplines, it's taken me a lifetime of skills gathered piecemeal here, there, and everywhere. By and large, it just takes so long to develop a skill level in any of those individual things. But it ain't the old days anymore. And today we've got services like Skillshare, a service that provides you with near limitless amounts of information for one small subscription fee. Seriously, all of their curated learning modules and lessons and classes, they're all available at your fingertips. What if you're a graphic designer and then one day you just need to learn something very specific in the world of spreadsheets? Your Skillshare account has you covered. And the courses are all curated, meaning that there's a standard level of competency required for anyone to be teaching a course. And the best part about all this is Skillshare offers free trials. So all you need to do is click the link in the description. It'll take you to their site and you can start learning right now. Or, you know, like wait till after my video. But either way, look, Skillshare. You know, it's great. I was just clicking through looking for a thumbnail. And it's funny, there's so many parts there where, you know, in this character, Lindsey looks just like a hunter stalking, you know, she's doing such sweeping, like you can imagine an elven character stalking through the woods, hunting like an elk or something like that, with just these beautiful lyrical poses of just like, you know, being sneaky and just sort of flowing through the woods, you know, if that makes sense. It's, it's really interesting. Look, at the end of the day, this is exactly what it is. It's kind of like a cinematic, soundtracky kind of thing. This is the song, particularly towards the beginning of it. This is the song that they'll typically play during the end credits of like a fantasy film or some sort of a movie with, you know, a blockbuster or something like that, where, you know, they'll do like the post-credit scene and then it'll fade out and then you'll hear this. Typically like high fantasy, even stuff like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon and things like that comes to mind, you know. but definitely fantasy films where they always do that one tentpole soundtrack song that's got a beautiful, dramatic, passionate, and impassioned performance, female vocal over something that's like, it's still just, your basic sort of diatonic chords, but with like really beautiful and lush orchestration and arrangement and all that sort of stuff. So, and that's exactly what this is. And this is something that like, Amy in particular is particularly good at. Like I said, my first experience was a song on the soundtrack of like a comic book film, and so she's just fantastic at presenting those kinds of musical aesthetics, I guess, where you feel like you're experiencing something other than just a piece of music or a song. It feels like has a purpose, and that purpose is to make you feel something akin to what you would see watching a narrative performance on screen with characters you feel, they're on an impassioned quest and you feel for them and you're engaged in their story. This is an example of a song that sort of takes you on a similar journey. Lyrically, it's, there's not a lot going on because the melody is so simple, so that you've got to keep the pentameter and the dialogue of the words really specific, and very carefully chosen, because you don't want it to be too verbose. You don't want lyrics all over the place. You want every two lines to be a balanced pair. Da 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 da. Because you don't want just the talking for the sake of talking to take you away from the overall lyrical experience, and also fundamentally from the auditory performance of the whole thing. You don't want to be distracted by a bunch of lyrics, as good as they may be. And so this is very I use this term very carefully, very simplistic lyricism, but that in itself is complicated, because writing very simple lyrics that stand up against the amazing poetry of other artists is in and of itself an art form, right? It's doing way more with less, and it might just be simple themes like, love and this and that, blah, blah, blah. But the knowledge and the maturity to put in things that may at first glance appear to be a little benign or a little bit standard, in order to fit in, or to work within the piece, is way more complicated than it seems. Everybody wants to prove that they're a great poet, and so they come up with these complicated ideas and themes. Try writing a simple love song. It's a knack. It's definitely something is way more complicated than it seems. It's one of those things where they make it seem so simple and effortless, but choosing the right word, you could be literally, in a lyric writing session, you could just butt up against the greatest line you've ever written, and then you've got a follow-up line and there just isn't a word to fit. And you have to have the bravery to go, okay, that line has to go. We'll take out, it's literally the most beautiful piece of poetry I've ever written in 4 words, but because nothing goes with it, sometimes you got to trash it and keep moving, come up with something else. And that's hurtful to the ego, but you've got to serve the song, right? And that this is, just really interesting. I might actually, hang on a second, I'll pause this for a second. I'm going to actually read through the lyrics because I want to see if there's anything there. I didn't notice anything while listening, but then again, it's a pretty distracting song. There's a lot going on. I'm back. So I had a quick look through the lyrics, and interestingly enough, there's not a lot there. There's only 4 paragraphs, right? Or stanzas, I guess. And again, there's beauty in the simplicity. She's not trying to evoke any kind of a complex scenario or like take you on a lyrical, like narrative driven journey through like 18 different verses and stuff like that. Because there's no room. This song is as long as it is, which is like 4 minutes long. But you've got an incredibly long intro. You've got an outro. You've got a violin solo. You've got some other parts that are repetitive. And then you've got space for verses. There's no chorus per se. It sort of just, happens. Vocals just pop in when they need to. Which is, again, is interesting in of itself because, the structure of standard pop writing is, you typically have your intro, whatever that may equate to. And then you got usually 1 or 2 verses, a chorus, another verse, sometimes another chorus, then a bridge, and then you do a couple of choruses and an outro, right? That's the standard driven thing to get all the elements in there in an order that kind of makes sense. But yeah, like there's an old familiar silence when I'm lost inside my heart. I can't hear the voice inside me, so I look up to the stars. It's beautiful, simple, deceptively simple, but beautiful. I can hear the darkness. Oh, sorry. There's a darkness ever waiting. I can feel it in the air. So I call upon my angels. Are you still there? It evokes a sensation of what you're supposed to understand the song's about without actually telling you what to think. It's just keywords. Darkness ever waiting. I call upon my angels for assistance. Are you still there? Am I alone? Is it loneliness, you know? There's an old familiar silence when I'm lost inside my heart, right? It's like there's that loneliness again and introspection, you know? I can't hear the voice inside me. So you not only are you lonely in the sense of there's no one around to help you exist, but you can't even hear yourself, right? That's just like, that's that old familiar silence of just pure and unadulterated solitude, right? So I look up to the stars and then ask, where are the angels that are supposed to be here? Like it's, you know, you can extrapolate all of that data from two very basic 4-line verses that don't even have all that many syllables, right? And then, you know, that goes on, and then the next stanza is just repeated, right? It happens twice. So there's really just essentially 3 verses, one of which is repeated twice. And, you know, there's absolute beauty in that simplicity. And I think, you know, one of the hardest things ever for people who write with their ego, and most of us do, I think that a lot of people often, when they do anything creative, there's a part of them, they may not even be cognizant of it, that's wondering how people are going to interpret what they're putting out there. And, you know, sometimes that'll affect how you create. You'll be like, oh, people are going to love this, or, oh man, I don't know, I'm probably catch a lot of flack for this not being good enough, or whatever drives you. As part of what becomes complicated is people respond to simplicity. And so if you're over creating or overcompensating for what you believe will be something not well received, then sometimes you're doing too much, you know? And I feel like this is a really roundabout way of saying what Amy Lee in particular is great at. And I guess Lindsey as well, because she understands the same concepts of pop writing, is, you know, keeping it simple is sometimes the hardest thing to do, but often the most effective. And you know, these two do this particularly well. And listen, we just heard a very complex song. I'm not saying that this was a walk in the park. But what I'm saying is, from a compositional perspective, and from the perspective of the concepts of it, it's deceptively simple, but it's so lightning specific that it's impossible to miss what you're supposed to take away from it, because they just hit it with pinpoint accuracy. You get the sensation of that high fantasy. There's that whole, you know, I feel like I walked into Middle Earth the second I heard the first 5 to 10 seconds, you know? And it's got that sort of overarching sort of uplifting sensation, but there's a melancholy because the lyrics are a little bit sort of loneliness, solitude, calling to a higher power, all that sort of stuff. It's brilliant. It is a brilliant piece of music. I love the music video. Again, they didn't go overly complex. There's a few digital effects. What I found interesting, and I don't know if this is part of like a sub-narrative thing, but it looks like they're in the same location, but for whatever reason, Amy and Lindsey don't appear together at all. So maybe they just found places that look similar in their... But I've seen them on TikTok together, so who knows? But it's interesting, maybe their characters aren't ever supposed to meet. Like, there's a point there where Lindsey meets herself, and you've got like this sort of futuristic character in what could be the coolest jumpsuit I've ever seen, and then her fantasy character coming together to meet. And I wonder what the concept is behind that. I'll have to look into it, but fantastic. This is really, really cool. Listen, I'm fairly new to Lindsey, other than what I've sort of cursorily, I've had a cursory look into her journey every once in a while, but if there's anything else of hers that you think is phenomenal and I need to check it out, obviously I've seen her with Pentatonics, but pretty sure, am I imagining that? No, whatever. If you think there's anything that I should be watching of hers, let me know. I'm pretty up to date on most Evanescence stuff, even if I only listen to it once or twice, you know. But I'd be really keen to hear, or if there's any other cool sort of cinematic collaborations like this. This is really cool. Even it doesn't have to be these two, it could be anyone else. Let me know, because this sort of music is right up my alley. You can tell because I've been ranting about it for God knows how long. Yeah, anyway, look, if you feel like I've brightened your day at all, feel free to support the channel just by buying me a coffee. I'll leave a link in the description, or you can just hit the thanks button underneath this video on YouTube. It's a new system they've got to allow you to support the creators that you enjoy without leaving the app, which is really nice. Also, like, share, follow, subscribe. Obviously, you know, I appreciate being able to sort of put my work out there for as many eyes as possible, and that helps dramatically. So thanks again, guys. If you've stuck around this long, I appreciate you. Thanks again. Stay primal. I'll catch you on the next one.